Tom Holland stepped into the first-class cabin quietly, head low beneath the hood of a plain gray sweatshirt. His sneakers were scuffed, his black duffel bag worn soft from years of travel. There was nothing about him that screamed fame. Nothing that begged for attention. Just a young man moving with the quiet exhaustion of someone who'd given too much of himself to too many people lately. That he found his seat by the window, 3A, and sank into it slowly, grateful for the hush, for the luxury of silence. Outside the window, twilight streaked across the tarmac in faded hues of lavender and gold. He rested his head against the cool pane of glass and closed his eyes, hoping the long flight ahead would be more peace than performance. The hum of boarding passengers continued behind him, designer luggage, loud conversations, phones held too high on FaceTime. Then came the heavy thud of leather shoes, the sharp scent of cologne that filled the aisle like entitlement. The man who entered next didn't walk, he arrived, with the presence of someone convinced the room belonged to him the moment he stepped into it. He wore a tailored navy suit, cufflinks that shimmered, and a watch that cost more than most cars. He glanced once at Tom, then at his own boarding pass. His expression twisted. "You've got to be kidding me," the man said loudly, stopping in the aisle. Tom opened his eyes but said nothing. "That's my seat," the man snapped. 3A, you're in the wrong place. Tom blinked slowly, calm. "No, sir. This is my seat." The man let out a dry, sarcastic laugh. "Right. I'm sure you just wandered into first class by accident. Happens all the time. Come on, let's not make this uncomfortable. Up." Tom didn't move. He reached into the side of his hoodie and pulled out his boarding pass, offering it wordlessly. The man snatched it, eyes scanning the name, then frowning. "Thomas Holland," he muttered, confused. "Whatever. Doesn't matter. I don't care what it says. This seat isn't yours." A flight attendant appeared, sensing the tension. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" "Yes," the man said quickly, waving the boarding pass. "This kid's in my seat." Tom stayed quiet. The flight attendant took the pass gently from the man's hand and checked it. Her eyes met Tom's, softened with recognition, then turned firm. "He's in the correct seat, sir," she said. 3A is assigned to Mr. Holland." The man scoffed. "Are you serious? Look at him. He looks like someone's assistant. Or a student. This is first class." The words cut the air like a blade. Tom's jaw tightened, but he still didn't speak. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice," the attendant said quietly. "You're disturbing other passengers." The man turned to the rest of the cabin as if seeking validation. Some passengers looked away. A few watched with mild interest, some with unease. No one spoke. Tom sat still. Not in fear, but with that rare kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. The man noticed it. And hated it. "You know what?" he snapped, voice dropping to a cruel murmur. "People like you don't belong in spaces like this. I don't care what ticket you have." Tom turned then, meeting the man's eyes for the first time. There was no anger in his face. Only quiet sorrow. The flight attendant stepped between them. "Sir, please take your seat." The man muttered something under his breath, grabbed his bag, and shuffled off to 3B, the seat next to Tom's. As he sat, he crossed his arms in frustration, his presence buzzing with resentment. Tom looked out the window again, as if the whole thing hadn't happened, that he didn't know yet that this flight would become something neither of them would forget. That the seat the man had fought so hard to claim would become the place where pride would unravel, and something more human might begin to take its place. The plane taxied slowly toward the runway, the soft vibration of the engines thrumming beneath the floor. A hush settled over the cabin, that stillness before flight when even the proud feel small, suspended between earth and sky. Tom leaned his head against the window again, eyes half closed, doing his best to ignore the man beside him. But the air between them still pulsed with tension. The man's chest puffed, jaw tight, seemed unable to let it go. His leg bounced impatiently. His fingers tapped against the armrest. And then, just as the seatbelt light dinged on, he spoke again. "You know," the man muttered, voice low but sharp, back in my day, respect meant something. You dressed the part. You looked people in the eye. You didn't sneak into places you didn't belong. Tom didn't reply, the man exhaled, slow and deliberate. You're probably some influencer or YouTube guy or whatever. All flash, no substance. I've seen your type. The flight attendant passed, offering drinks. The man took a scotch without asking. Tom politely declined, of course, the man said, smirking. Wouldn't want to risk anything too refined, right? Tom turned toward him then, finally speaking. Is there a reason you're still talking to me? The man blinked, as if surprised to be confronted. Just making conversation. It doesn't feel like that, Tom said calmly. A pause, the man took a sip of his drink and looked away. I'm just saying, he added, quieter now, there are places people earn. Not everyone gets a seat like this. Tom said nothing. Minutes passed. The plane lifted into the air. City lights shrank below. The clouds swallowed them whole. Tom reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook worn, frayed at the edges. He flipped through pages of handwriting. Lyrics. Journal entries. Scribbled ideas. Things the world would never see. The man noticed. You write? A little, Tom said, not looking up. The man leaned back, suddenly less confident than before. My nephew used to write. Before, he stopped. Never mind. Another silence. Longer this time, the attendant returned, this time carrying a small folded note. She bent slightly toward Tom, her voice gentle. Mr. Holland, she said. The captain asked me to deliver this. Also, he wanted me to tell you the hospital in Tokyo sends their warmest gratitude. They said your donation helped fund the new pediatric wing. He said to let you know, the children are doing well. The cabin stilled. The words, though softly spoken, seemed to echo off every wall. Tom looked up, softly smiled. Thank you. The attendant walked away. The man beside him went pale. His mouth parted slightly. His drink was halfway to his lips, frozen. Slowly, he turned his head toward Tom. Tokyo, he asked, barely a whisper. Which hospital? Tom didn't answer. The man's eyes widened. That hospital, they saved my nephew. Acute leukemia. The new wing, that's where he was. That's where he stopped himself, his voice cracking. Tom met his gaze, calm, unmoved, but not cruel. I didn't know, the man said. His voice was quieter now, thinner somehow. I didn't know it was you. Tom's expression didn't change. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with kindness. The man dropped his eyes. His shoulders deflated. Whatever armor he'd walked on board with had cracked straight through the center. The rest of the flight passed in silence. No more muttered comments. No more superiority. Just a man sitting beside another man, both looking out into a night sky they didn't control, and somewhere between the clouds and the stars, the man who once shouted now sat still, breathing through the weight of a shame that didn't need punishment, just grace. The sky outside the window was ink black now, scattered with stars that shimmered faintly through the haze. The kind of night where the world seemed far away, where a cabin suspended in the sky felt like a floating confession booth. Tom sat still, notebook closed in his lap. He hadn't written a word since the captain's message. He hadn't needed to. Silence had said everything. Beside him, the man who once roared with certainty now sat swallowed by it, still, breath shallow, hands clenched and unclenched on his lap. The drink he once held with pride now rested untouched on the tray table, the ice inside it melting without protest. That he turned toward Tom slowly, like someone approaching the edge of a ledge. Can I, he began, then stopped. I owe you more than a sorry, I know that. Tom didn't look over. You don't owe me anything. I think I do, the man said, voice cracking under the weight of regret. You sat there, calm, while I tore into you like some entitled jerk. And you didn't fight back. You didn't humiliate me. You could have. God, you could have destroyed me. But you didn't. Tom finally met his eyes. That wouldn't have healed anything. The man looked down at his hands, ashamed. My name's Daniel. I thought I had this life figured out, you know. Worked hard, built something, bought the suit, sat in the seat. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that respect had to be earned through power. Through status. Not through compassion. He swallowed hard. My nephew's name is Caleb. He was 8 when they diagnosed him. We thought we'd lose him. And then that hospital in Tokyo opened a new pediatric unit. Specialized care. Better equipment. Hope. And now, his voice trembled. Now Caleb's home. He's healing. He's drawing again. He wrote a letter to someone he called a hero he'd never met. We didn't know who it was. Not until now. Tom's voice was soft, almost a whisper. It was never about being a hero. I just wanted to help. Daniel nodded, eyes glistening. And I wanted to feel important. A long pause. I saw a hoodie and sneakers, he admitted, and I assumed worthlessness. But you were the one carrying more grace in your silence than I've ever carried in a room full of applause. The words stung Daniel as he said them. But he didn't flinch. He needed the sting. It was the only thing keeping his heart awake. I'm sorry, he said again, voice barely audible. Not because you're famous. Not because I was wrong about your name. But because I forgot what it means to see a person. Tom sat with the words, letting them settle like dust after a storm. You didn't just forget, he said quietly. You were taught wrong. We all are. That value wears a label. That kindness is weakness. That humility means someone hasn't made it yet. But the truth is, he looked out the window again. The strongest people I've met don't need to be seen to make a difference. Daniel nodded, slowly. And here I thought I had something to teach the world. You still might, Tom said, finally looking at him not with condescension, but with something deeper. But maybe it starts with learning again first. The rest of the flight drifted by in near silence. No more tension. Just stillness. Reflection. The kind that only comes when a person realizes they've been wearing the wrong mask for years. As the plane began its descent, the lights in the cabin brightened. Flight attendants moved quietly, waking passengers, securing trays, resetting order. But in seat 3B, Daniel didn't move. He stared forward like a man who wasn't sure how to return to earth with the weight of what had just been revealed. When the wheels touched down and the cabin jolted gently, he turned toward Tom one last time. I don't think I deserve to say anything more, he said. But I want to say thank you. For not giving me what I gave you. Tom smiled faintly. You didn't see me. That's okay. Just make sure you see the next person. Daniel stood, letting others pass him in the aisle. For the first time in years, he wasn't in a rush. When Tom reached for his bag, Daniel gently stopped him. Let me, he said, lifting it down for him. Not because he had to. But because he needed to. Tom took it without a word. But their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not absolution, not approval, but recognition. Outside the jet bridge, the world buzzed with motion again. Lights, voices, the sound of life resuming its pace. Daniel stood to the side, watching Tom disappear into the crowd. No fans swarmed him. No flashing cameras. Just a man in a hoodie, walking with quiet grace, and Daniel, for the first time in a long time, didn't need the world to slow down for him to understand what mattered, that he had seen something sacred at 30,000 feet. And now, the only thing left to do, was live like it. The terminal lights overhead were bright and sterile, casting long reflections on the polished floor. Voices echoed announcements in several languages, the rhythmic hum of rolling suitcases, families reuniting in soft embraces, business travelers on calls, children laughing too loud. It was life again, busy and blind, moving too fast to notice the sacred things. Daniel stood still in the middle of it all, people parting around him like water around a rock. Tom was gone, swallowed by the current, absorbed back into a world that expected too much of him and understood too little. He hadn't looked back. He hadn't needed to. What had been shared between them on that flight had been quiet, but complete. Daniel looked down at his reflection on the floor, the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the carry-on he'd once wielded like a crown. He saw himself now the way others must have, collected, confident, clean. But underneath the fabric, he felt something else entirely. Stripped. Bare. A man unlearning everything he thought made him worthy. He moved toward a bench by the baggage claim and sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, hands folded like prayer. His phone buzzed in his jacket. A message from his sister. "Caleb drew something for you. He says it's you and your secret hero flying through the clouds. He misses you already. Come by when you can." Daniel swallowed hard. He hadn't cried in years, hadn't let himself. But now something broke loose. Not loud, not messy. Just quiet tears rolling down a face that hadn't felt anything honest in far too long. He replied with trembling hands, "Tell him I met the hero." Then, after a pause, he added, "And he changed me." Across the terminal, Tom had already reached the exit. He walked with his hood still up, slipping through shadows with practiced invisibility. A car waited outside, but he didn't approach it right away. He stood there for a moment, letting the cool air hit his face, grounding him. His assistant, waiting by the door, called gently, "Tom, you ready?" He nodded but didn't move. "Give me a second." He pulled out his notebook and opened it to a blank page. For the first time in a while, words came without force. "A man shouted at me today, not because I wronged him, but because he didn't know me, and when he did he apologized, not to a name. Not to a face, but to a soul he forgot to recognize. Maybe that's all any of us are waiting for. To be seen, not as what we were, not as what we've earned, but as who we are, unhidden. Undeserving. Enough. He closed the notebook. Inside the airport, Daniel finally stood. He didn't rush. He didn't check his reflection in the glass. He didn't reach for his phone to post something that would make him feel important again. He walked toward the exit with his head a little lower. Not in shame but in reverence, and just before the sliding doors opened, a woman struggling with 2 suitcases and a restless toddler dropped her boarding pass. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward. He picked it up, handed it to her with both hands, and smiled softly. "Here," he said. "No need to thank me." She smiled back, surprised. "That's rare these days." Daniel looked down for a moment. Trying to make it less rare. He walked into the night without waiting for approval. Far across the city, Caleb sat in his room, crayons spread across the carpet, sketching a plane in the clouds. 2 figures sat inside. One wore a cape. The other had a suit and a sad face, but in the last panel, the suited man was smiling. Caleb drew stars outside the window. Big ones that he colored them gold. The night outside Tokyo was gentle. A breeze moved through the city like breath, calm, steady, quiet. Lights twinkled in the distant skyline, but one window on the edge of town glowed warmer than the rest. Inside, laughter echoed from a small apartment, not loud, but full. Full of something that had almost been lost, and now was slowly being found again. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered around him like a burst of color. His latest drawing was carefully folded into thirds and tucked into an envelope that sat beside a small toy plane. On the envelope, in shaky but determined handwriting, was one name, Tom Holland. He didn't know that the letter would ever reach him. He just knew it had to be written. I in the kitchen, Daniel stood silently beside his sister, watching her pour tea into 2 mismatched mugs. "I was awful," he said softly, almost to himself. She didn't look up. "You were hurting." "No," Daniel replied. "I was arrogant. And I didn't even realize it until that man sat beside me and didn't give me what I deserved." She slid a mug toward him and finally met his eyes. "What did he give you?" Daniel paused. His throat tightened. "He gave me stillness. Grace. He let me see myself without making me feel ashamed of who I had been." He looked toward the living room, where Caleb hummed softly as he drew. "That boy out there, Daniel whispered, "he got a second chance." "And now, so did I." His sister nodded. "Don't waste it." Daniel didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in a small chair by Caleb's bedside, notebook open, pen in hand. For hours he wrote not emails, not agendas. Just truths that he wrote about his father, who taught him to chase success but never showed him how to sit in silence. He wrote about his own son he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, the one he called selfish for walking away from the family business. He wrote about the masks he wore, the loud confidence, the dismissive jokes, the way he puffed himself up on flights just to feel like someone, and then he wrote about Tom, about a moment in a skybound cabin where 2 men sat side by side, one trying to prove himself, and one who had nothing to prove. About a silence that said more than sermons. About a young man in a hoodie who carried more dignity and quiet than most carry in applause. That he ended with this: "He gave me nothing but kindness, and in doing so, he gave me everything I didn't know I needed." That he reminded me that worth isn't seen in mirrors or suits or bank accounts, that it's seen in how we treat those we don't understand, and I think, finally, I'm beginning to understand. 3 days later, a package arrived at a private address in London. Tom sat on the floor of his flat, sipping coffee in worn socks and an old hoodie, flipping through a book of poetry he'd been meaning to read for months. The knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find a delivery man holding a thick envelope and a small box. No sender name. Just a return address from Tokyo. Tom thanked him quietly, closed the door, and carried the box to the table. He opened the envelope first. Inside was a folded drawing that a child's art, that a plane in the clouds. 2 passengers sitting side by side, one wearing a cape, the other in a blue suit, holding a heart, and behind them, golden stars. Beneath it, in blocky handwriting, "You helped my uncle help me. Thank you for flying with him." Caleb. Tom's breath caught. He ran his fingers lightly across the page, like it was made of glass. He opened the letter next. Daniel had written by hand, black ink, no edits. Just truth. It spoke of pride, of blindness, of failure. Of transformation. Of a man saved not by celebrity, but by restraint. By humility. By love shown in silence. The end of the letter was a simple line: "I'll never forget that you didn't fight me. You just showed me who I was by showing me who you are. Thank you, Tom." Tom set the letter down. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Something inside him felt a little more whole than it had before. Then he opened the box. Inside was a gift, simple, handmade. A keychain carved out of wood, shaped like a paper airplane. On one wing, etched carefully by hand, "Be kind first." On the other, "You never know who's sitting beside you." Tom closed his eyes, and smiled, not because he was thanked, but because something small he gave without fanfare had returned with wings. Back in Tokyo, Daniel walked with Caleb through a park, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. He no longer wore the expensive suits. Not because he'd rejected them, but because he'd realized they no longer carried him. Caleb tugged his hand. "Do you think we'll see the flying man again?" Daniel smiled. "Maybe not in person. But we'll keep flying with him. Every time we choose kindness when it's hard." Caleb thought for a moment. Then whispered, "Like you did." Daniel nodded, "Like I'm learning to do." They walked on. No destination. Just forward. Above them, a plane moved silently across the sky, and below it, a man and a boy, both given back to themselves by a stranger who never raised his voice, and changed everything. 6 months later, a quiet morning dawned over a modest theater in downtown London. Not the kind of place that made headlines or red carpets, but a space where real things happened, honest things. Youth workshops, spoken word nights, and a battered piano that never stayed in tune but somehow always sounded right. Tom sat cross-legged on the edge of the small stage, a circle of teenagers seated in front of him. No cameras. No script. Just him, a hoodie, and a room full of kids trying to figure out who they were allowed to be. One boy raised his hand. "Were you ever scared you weren't good enough?" Tom smiled. "Every day." The kids leaned in. This wasn't Spider-Man talking. This was Tom. The boy who grew up unsure, who still sometimes walked into rooms and felt like he didn't belong, no matter how many billboards bore his face. What did you do? Another asked. I stopped trying to be loud, Tom said gently. And I started listening. The room fell still. There was a man on a plane once, he continued, who hated me the moment he saw me. He didn't know who I was, just what I wasn't to him. And for a while, I thought he didn't deserve my kindness. He looked down at his hands, but I gave it anyway. Not because I'm good. But because someone, a long time ago, gave it to me when I didn't deserve it either. That's the chain. That's how we change the world, one undeserved kindness at a time. A girl in the back wiped her eyes. Tom stood, stretching a little. Kindness doesn't need a microphone, he said. It just needs a moment. As the kids clapped softly and began to rise, his phone buzzed quietly on the edge of the stage. He glanced at the screen. New message from Daniel. Subject: Caleb's birthday. He opened it. Tom, today Caleb turns 9. He asked me if we could fly somewhere again. He wants to sit by the window like you did. Said that's where the heroes think best. He still talks about you. Still draws. Still hopes one day you'll write a story with him. That I hope you know you gave us more than a moment. You gave us a before and an after. You gave us a way back to each other, and I'm still carrying that kindness forward. Every day, happy to report, Seat 3B is now a place I fill with grace. Thank you. Forever, Daniel. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, not in pride. Not in pain. But in that sacred stillness that comes when you know something mattered not to the world, not to the masses, but to one boy, one man. One stranger who no longer had to be. He grabbed his notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote 4 words, be kind on purpose. Then he packed his things, pulled his hood over his head, and stepped into the day not as a celebrity, not as a symbol, but as a man who knew who he was, and who he was enough.